Welcome to the Little Sparks Podcast, your home for all things faith and music. I'm Cecilia.
And I'm Tara.
And we're former college roommates, professional musicians, and co-founders of the Hildegard Collective, a space for Catholic musicians to connect with one another and grow in their faith and profession. This podcast is an outreach of the collective, so if you're interested at all in Catholicism, music, or both, this is the podcast for you. Join us each week as we get real, share stories, and learn from other awesome Catholic musicians. We're all little sparks of God's divine creation, so together, let's ignite the world for Christ. Welcome to the 5th season of the Little Sparks Podcast. I cannot believe that we have reached the 5th season. I feel like we say that every single season, just like, I can't believe we're at this point already, you know?
Yeah, but time really does fly. Like, it does kind of feel like yesterday that we were just beginning the podcast with, like, really no idea what we were doing.
What's cool, too, is that we're, like, recording this right around the time that we launched our very first episode ever 2 years ago. So we have now officially hit 2 years of the Little Sparks Podcast, which is wild and crazy.
That is super cool, actually. I didn't know that. I'm really bad with keeping track of dates and stuff like that. But that's actually super cool. Very, like, full circle kind of moment.
Super, super full circle. I didn't realize it either, but until, like, just, like, recently. I was just like, oh, wait a second. We've been doing this for 2 years now, so.
Yeah.
2 years, and now we're on our 5th season. This is great.
We're rocking away.
We are. So, if you listen to the Season 5 preview, you will know that this season is centering entirely around the topic of moral theology. And we are really excited about diving into this topic. But we also recognize that the sound of moral theology might be intimidating or even scary. And we want to dispel that myth very quickly in this first episode, that moral theology is not scary. So
yeah, for sure.
That is the topic for today.
Yeah. I think there can also be a sense that perhaps moral theology is in some ways irrelevant to people who are not theologians. And I think it's really important to dispel that myth that even just as ordinary everyday lay people who have maybe no background in formal theology, no intention of ever pursuing formal theology, it's still really important to understand, maybe not at a super high academic level, what moral theology is and all of the intricacies of this topic, but at the very least, how it's actually relevant to our lived experiences day to day. And so we've kind of planned this season, as we discussed in our previous episode, to kind of address how this topic is particularly relevant to us as musicians and what that looks like for our professional lives as well as our personal ones.
Yes, absolutely. Because the thing about moral theology that you'll come to find is it's a very practical theology. It's very tangible and has a lot of reflection in our actions and how we live our lives and all of that. So yeah, moral theology is actually, I got a minor in theology during college, and moral theology was one of my favorite things to study. So I'm really, really, really excited about getting to dive into this specifically for what this means for the life of a working professional musician. So yeah, to dive in, I thought it might be good to break down the term of theology to begin with, because what exactly does this term mean, you know? So obviously when we look at the root of the word ology, that means study. So we think of, biology, the study of life, paleontology, sociology, even anthropology, there's all kinds of ologies, psychology, so ology means study. And so then theology means the study of God. So that's really what theology is. It is as intimidating as you want to make it in a certain sense. Because, with God is infinite, right? And we don't have the capacity as humans in this life to understand God fully. so there's at the end of the day, in this life, there's only so far down into this subject that we will get. Um, and ultimately in heaven, that's when the fulfillment of all knowledge will happen, and we will, spend eternity getting to know infinity, getting to know God,
Mm, that's a
which
good
I
way of
think is
putting
just so
that.
cool. And but that being said, we can dive into it to varying degrees, according to our lives and where we're at spiritually and all of that. Um, and it makes me think of in the Gospel of Mark in chapter 12, Jesus is talking to, I think, the scribes and the Pharisees. And one of the scribes asks, the question of, what is the greatest commandment? And
Mm,
Jesus says, to love the Lord with not just all of our hearts and our souls, but with all our minds too.
yeah,
And I think that's a really important thing to remember because sometimes it can be easy to just boil Christianity down to, love your neighbor and, do kind things and have a relationship with Jesus. And yes, absolutely. But our minds don't have to be left out of that conversation either.
yeah,
Um, we're more than just hearts and souls. We also have, minds and our bodies too. So we're called to love the Lord with all of ourselves in all of these different aspects. And that's going to look different for every single person based on, your own capacities and limitations even and what you're called to in your life. But you are called to love the Lord with all your heart, all your soul, all your mind, all your will. Um, and so that's just really important, I think, for us as Christians to keep in mind.
yeah. And I think often about, like, when I think about not only my relationship with God, but also my relationship with other people, I always kind of come back to this idea that, like, you you cannot love what you don't know and what you don't
I like that.
understand. And so the more that we make an effort to actually know and understand who God is through both the church and the tradition and the scriptures that He's left for us, but also in our day to day lives and experiences, encountering Him in other people, encountering Him in nature, encountering Him in music, encountering Him in
Yeah.
all of the many facets in which He can present Himself to us in our lives. All of those experiences kind of compound to make our own personal understandings of who God is. And it is really only then and in and through those experiences that we truly can love Him and can fulfill that vocation.
Yes, I love that so much. And I like what you say about, bringing all these parts together because, like, um, even while we can learn about God on a very intellectual level, but it does become so applicable to every aspect of our lives, not just our intellectual life. Because, we're bodies and souls. We're not just
Yeah,
one or the other, we were made to live integrated lives that aren't, compartmentalized.
yeah, 100%.
So, anyway, to go on from that, so that's a bit about, the word theology and why theology is important and all of that. Um, so, going on to moral theology, what exactly moral theology is. I really like this definition from this really awesome book from Ascension Press by Matthew K. Minard called Made by God, Made for God, Catholic Morality Explained. I'll link to it in the show notes. It's a wonderful, wonderful book. But I really like the definition that he gives of moral theology. And he says, moral theology studies the image of God reflected in human action. I think that's
Hmm.
just so cool. Isn't that?
That's a really good way of explaining that, actually. I've never heard that definition before, but that actually makes it really, like, really clear and really
Yeah,
simple as
and
well.
super
It's like,
tangible. And it's not like it doesn't sound scary at all,
yeah,
or
yeah,
like inaccessible. But I really like that definition. So moral theology then, becomes very important to the Christian life because it helps us to become who God created us to be. It helps us to see others the way God created them to be. And it helps us to see how God created us in relationship to himself as well.
Mm,
There's all these different aspects of, the active Christian life that moral theology gives gives guidelines to. And I almost like to think of it as almost like boundaries because, all good, healthy relationships have boundaries, right?
mm,
And we're made for a relationship with God. And God doesn't need boundaries because he's perfect. But he gives us boundaries for our own sakes so we won't get hurt because we have free will that he's given to us. And this is this good gift. But we have the ability to misuse that and to use our gift of free will to hurt others and ourselves.
yeah,
So you can almost think of moral theology as this set of boundaries and guidelines so that we aren't going to necessarily hurt others or ourselves or
mm,
God.
yeah, totally.
But yeah, anyway, with these, you can then almost think of sin as breaking these boundaries, going against
Hmm.
these guidelines that God has set for us. Because sin, what does sin do? It hurts us, it hurts others, it hurts our relationship with God, most importantly. So sin is like breaking those boundaries. And, ultimately, sin always hurts us. And one interesting thing that I learned semi recently, been doing catechism in a year with Father Mike Schmitz very, very slowly, very, very slowly. Still haven't completed the whole thing. But there is a section on sin, and Father Mike Schmitz was explaining, like, these passages in the catechism about sin and breaking it down. And one thing that he pointed out that we sometimes fall into this trap of thinking that there's such a thing as a personal sin, a sin that only hurts us, but
Hmm.
there actually is no sin that hurts just us. At
Yeah,
the end of the day, sin, like, always in like just some mysterious way hurts the entire body of Christ in
it's
a
so
way that we
true.
can't even fathom. And I don't know, that stopped when I heard that, that really stopped me in my tracks.
Hmm.
Because I definitely had, fallen into that, idea of, there are some sins that surely are personal sins. And that don't hurt anyone but me and my relationship with God, which is bad enough, which is really bad enough, but
Yeah,
they
yeah.
also hurt everybody else too, in a way that we just can't even fathom.
Yeah, and I think I think about that a lot in terms of even if I commit a sin that I, for whatever reason, am convinced is only personal to me, I'm the only one affected by it. Even the experience of that sin and its effect on my own mind and my own heart and my own soul will be reflected in my life and my perception of
Mm.
other people and my interactions with other people, even if it's like in nearly an imperceptible way that I don't even necessarily notice in myself. Sometimes, like, we can be the blindest to our own shortcomings and our own actions in that way.
That is
But
very true.
even like the smallest, seemingly minuscule, very hidden personal sin, even if nobody else even knows about it, it will affect the people around you in your day to day life. Guaranteed, it's a promise. It's just true.
Amen to that. That's a really interesting perspective that I had never considered.
Yeah. And
So thank you for sharing that.
I think again, I think this whole topic of kind of moral theology and the study of the morality of our actions as set out by God and the boundaries that He's given us is so relevant to our lives as musicians in many ways because, especially for those of us who are working in secular music environments, like myself included in that, we can be surrounded by sinful actions from other people. And we can be very tempted to fall into sinful actions ourselves in a whole variety of ways. And I think there are certain ways that this appears in the life of a musician that is different to most people that we encounter every day in our lives. So I think addressing this topic from a uniquely kind of musical perspective is really important for our own spiritual development as musicians, so that when we encounter these things, we know in our minds the correct way to respond, and we actually have the courage and the confidence to understand why we need to respond positively. And it's like, again, as we just discussed, there is no such thing as personal sin. So it's just another facet of this conversation about why it's never okay to give in to temptation.
To continue on from here with sin, obviously we can look around at all of us, and ourselves as well, and come to the conclusion that we are all very much broken by sin in some way. We have our wounds, and we have our weaknesses, and we have, all of that good stuff. Original sin itself has, affected all of us, whether it's through, various sins that we struggle with, even comes, with illness and suffering, like the effects of original sin have to do with that too. Not because we necessarily did something ourselves wrong to merit the illness or suffering, but, just from that original sin of Adam and Eve bringing illness and suffering. So sin has, affected us all in wildly immense ways.
It done messed things up.
It done mess things up. uh, but, when it comes to our weaknesses and, the places that we fail and all of that good stuff, God's grace is massively, massively abundant. And he wants to help us grow in holiness. He wants to heal us in those places where we've been broken. I really love, there's a C.S. Lewis quote about how, Jesus is like the rightful king come on like an espionage, mission basically on enemy lines. And he wants us all to participate in this, this
Cool.
grand scheme of espionage. But it makes me think of just, he came to heal. The Lord saw us in our brokenness and said, no, I'm coming to heal them, And that promise goes all the way back to the book of Genesis after that first sin, God is like, yeah, this is the wreck, but you know what? I'm going to make you a promise, and I'm going to solve this, basically, So, and we have that with Jesus coming. And one of my favorite titles for Jesus is that of Divine Physician.
Yes.
And it's such a good title, it's just such a good reminder that he just desires to heal us, you know. He wants to make us whole and holy. But we do have free will, and we have to keep that in mind, And so, God doesn't force this on us. I remember hearing once, a few times actually, that God is a true gentleman. He does not force himself on us. We have to cooperate with our own free will and say yes. So, God isn't going to force that healing on us. We have to cooperate with it. So one way that we can actually cooperate with God's plan of healing is learning and studying the basics of moral theology to do that, because it's such this active, tangible, practical theology that is very applicable to everything that we do. So it's really good to have a basic foundation of moral theology. To go on, in the Gospels, Jesus says, I haven't come to abolish the law, but to fulfill it. And it is possible to follow, the law, the teachings of the church outwardly and to know it, but for our hearts to be very indifferent to it or even against it. And there was one, in my moral theology class I took in college, I remember at the beginning of the class, within the first few classes, the professor introduced this concept of morality of obligation versus morality of happiness. So with a morality of obligation, you're following a set of rules just for the sake of following the rules. It's, pretty dry. We've all been there at some point, whether it's in grade school or whatnot, But that's what morality of obligation is. It's okay, I'm following the 10 Commandments because I have to follow the 10 Commandments if I'm going to be a Christian. And that's it, But morality of happiness is doing things because we want to do them, not because we feel like we have to. So
Yeah.
love really comes into play with a morality of happiness.
Mm.
And in order to have this, morality of happiness instead of a morality of obligation, it's actually necessary to have a relationship with God because of that. Um, because otherwise, that aspect of love is not there. It's not
Yeah.
doing it for the sake of, for the sake of loving God. And because this is His plan for us,
And on that, I think we don't come to truly know who God is through just his laws alone. Because
hmm
in a sense, I think about like the Israelites in the Old Testament who were
Yeah.
given the Ten Commandments and were given like all of the rules that they follow in like Leviticus and stuff like that for like their priesthood and things like this. And they were, some of them were very intense, very, very strict, very, very serious.
Oh my gosh, yes. I just got
And
done reading the book of Leviticus, and I'm like,
oh,
holy crap.
yeah, and like, God gave these laws to them for their own benefit in many ways. But I think many of them didn't seek a personal relationship with God beyond just those laws. And then you get
hmm
situations like the golden calf, where suddenly God's laws on their own were not sufficient because they hadn't built this personal relationship of actually knowing who He is. And so He sent His
Yes.
Son in human form so that we could know Him and we could relate to Him and we could love Him and understand Him. And that gift is what transformed our entire like human ability to relate to God and to understand ourselves as made in his image and likeness and understand his own experience of coming and living as a human among us. Um, I had a
Yes,
teacher
yes, yes, yes.
I had a teacher who used to always tell us like God becoming human, the distance, so to speak, between God and humanity is greater than that of a human and a maggot. And imagine if you had to go become a maggot and die for maggot kind or something like you'd be
Oh
like
my gosh.
you'd be like that's insane. That's crazy. But God loves us so dearly and desires us to truly know Him and to form a personal relationship with Him so much that that distance was like nothing for Him. And
Yeah.
I think that is so amazing to think about it in those terms.
Oh
I
my
feel
gosh,
like that
yes.
always really contextualized it for me when my teacher would make those comments. I was like, whoa, that's pretty crazy because maggots are pretty gross.
Well, maggots also aren't made in the image and likeness of God, so I
Yeah,
think
of
that does help.
course. Like obviously it like theologically it doesn't hold water, but like
No,
it's
but like
it's a
no, it
valid
is an
point.
interesting metaphor for sure, to help get the point across.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like, you can't have a relationship with a set of rules. You can only have a relationship with a person, which is
Yeah.
why Jesus came as a person. Um, but the rules serve the relationship, or guidelines or boundaries, or, however you want to put it. They serve the relationship.
Yeah.
So that's something I think that's very important to keep in mind in regards with moral theology, with the
Yeah.
teachings of the church, and how they apply to our everyday lives. Um, so,
And another like comparison that I was thinking about as you were talking about rules and boundaries and how they actually serve the relationship um, is I think about like music and
mm,
both of our I would say relationships with music and probably most people's because um, like I know in college I can speak for myself like the temptation and the tendency to like over practice and not
mm,
have like healthy boundaries with my instrument and with my relationship with my career and what I was striving towards professionally that temptation was so real, and it actually
Yeah.
ended up being more damaging in the end. And when I actually set those boundaries and said, okay, I will practice for an hour a day, maybe 90 minutes if I have like something major that I'm preparing for, but I will not go beyond that. And I, set all these rules for myself. Like, I'm going to make sure that I am setting aside enough time to eat 3 meals a day. I am going to make sure that, at least once a day I go and have a chat with a friend for an hour, you know, and I set all these rules and these boundaries for myself so that I was allowing myself to grow as like a person instead of
Yeah,
just as a
yeah.
musician. And it was only when I set those boundaries and set those rules that my practicing actually became way more efficient. And in the end, it served my relationship with music. I had more human experiences to pull from to inform my artistry. And at the end of the day,
Mm.
what I was so nervous about in setting these firm boundaries in my relationship with music actually ended up being really healthy and really beneficial.
Wow, that's awesome. I love that. As you were talking, it kind of almost reminded me as well of the virtue of temperance at play, which actually brings us to kind of our final little point of discussion about moral theology, and that is the virtues. They are the basis of moral theology, actually. Virtues, classically speaking, are seen as good habits. If you look at the ancient philosophers, they all considered virtues to be good habits, you know. Um, and the virtues give us practical ways to see how we can become more like Christ, which I really love, absolutely love. We love a good concrete way to see something,
100%.
good concrete examples because we're human and we need that, like I said, like ancient civilizations like the Greeks really they recognized the importance of virtue, and there are actually four virtues that the ancient world recognized that the church also recognizes, and those are called the cardinal virtues. The
Uh,
word cardinal comes from a root that means hinge, so like everything hinges on these virtues, which is really cool. So those virtues can actually be obtained without God's grace directly. Like you can not follow God and still obtain these four virtues
mm,
perfectly. It's harder, a heck of a lot harder to do it that way. But you can actually look to the ancient world and see different examples of these virtues at play very, very well in some of these ancient people,
that's cool.
or
That's
accounts of
interesting.
ancient peoples. So those four virtues are justice, prudence, temperance, and fortitude. Um, and I think next episode we're going to be talking about the virtues in general, and so we'll go into a deeper discussion of each of those cardinal virtues. And I think it might be cool to share some, like maybe some practical, real world examples of how these virtues can come into play, for a professional musician.
Yeah.
So those are the cardinal virtues, and then there's a second set, I should say, the theological virtues, and these virtues are direct gifts from God. We can't obtain them on our own, and those are the virtues of faith, hope, and charity, also known as love. So those are the three theological virtues, and you've got four cardinal virtues. And I am super, super excited to dive into those next episode and chat more about them and how they apply to us as musicians, and it's going to be awesome.
Yeah. That's very cool. That's very interesting. I already have thoughts like spinning in my mind of my own experiences and things I've learned about the virtues. So that'll
Oh
be
my
good.
gosh, I'm so excited. I can't wait to hear all of your thoughts. This is going to be great. So, anyway, to sum up on all of this with, Catholic moral teachings and or moral theology is completely entwined with being in right relationship with God and becoming the person He created us to be. And it's really beautiful, I think. Following these moral teachings can be really hard at times because of the effects of sin and brokenness and all of that. But it's important to remember that God's grace is always there to help us on the way. So,
Yeah. Um, Something that my parish priest was saying in his homily today actually was about how the root of the name of Satan means the accuser, the one who accuses.
Yes.
And I've heard this many times before that, like, the devil will call you by your sin when God calls you by your name. And I
Oh,
think,
I love that.
and I think, in as far as like moral theology goes, and we're talking about the morality of our actions, um, sometimes even for like the most faithful people, it can be really easy to fall into this temptation of despair if we feel we're stuck in a habit of sin, or we have maybe a past history that we're really ashamed of. And even though, mentally and logically you can understand God's mercy has forgiven you, it can be hard to really come to terms with that reality. And so I think whenever we're discussing actions and the the moral quality of our actions, whether for good or for bad, it's always important to remember that like our actions do not define who we are. And in fact, it is only Christ on the cross who shed his blood for you individually and for me individually as a person who is made in his image and likeness and who has an inherent dignity that no sin, no action, no temptation can ever strip away from us. That is where our true identity lies. And
Amen to
so
that.
if moral theology is something that overwhelms you for reason of having to examine your own actions, I just want you to keep in mind that you are not the sum of your actions. You will never be the sum of your actions. Anything that you have ever done wrong or will ever do wrong has the capacity to be enveloped in the mercy of Christ, totally forgiven and totally redeemed. And next time you are in a church or in a bedroom, anywhere where there's a crucifix, basically, I have one right up over there on my shelf.
Love it.
Just like look at Christ on the cross, look at him hanging there for you in agony, and just say a little prayer to yourself and place your identity at the foot of the cross there, because that is where you belong. You are right there with Christ in the moment of salvation. And just don't forget that whenever you're thinking about moral theology, whenever you're thinking about the quality of your own actions and your own journey with God, just keep that in mind, that your identity is in him alone.
Amen to that. What a beautiful way to tie up this entire episode, Tara.
Thank you so much. That was definitely a Holy Spirit moment because I wasn't expecting that to come out, but here we are.
We love Holy Spirit moments. That's the best, you know?
We do.
Literally before every single podcast episode, we ask, for like God to help us to say what he wants us to say, no more, no less. And there you go. Prime example. We love it. So, shall we share what we've been listening to?
Yes. Oh my gosh. So I have kind of a cool story to share with this.
Ooh. Very excited.
Yeah. So on Friday of this week, that was so 2 days ago when we're recording this, I worked a show at the venue where I work for the priests. So for anybody who's familiar, there are these three Irish priests. Their names are Father Eugene, Father Martin, and Father David. And they have been singing together as a trio for 50 years. And they are amazing. They've like sold out Carnegie Hall. They have been all over Europe. They've like toured the whole world performing, but they're also just like diocesan priests here in Ireland. And
I love it.
they are amazing. They have like won all of these awards. They have like platinum selling albums. It's amazing. Like they're honestly phenomenal. And so when I saw that they were coming through our venue this is their farewell tour now because they've been performing for 50 years and just the demands of parish life are getting difficult to balance with their music career. Basically, is what Father David was sharing with me on Friday. And I immediately signed myself up when I saw they were coming through. And it was actually such a beautiful, moving experience. I
Oh,
was kind of on Friday, I had kind of a tough day at work. I was definitely not in the best mood when it came time to like work for the show. And I could feel like my patience getting short, and I was trying to just be really measured and really careful with how I spent my energy and my time, because I wanted to make sure basically that I had the energy to do my job. And I ended up like meeting the three priests after their sound check, and I had some actually really beautiful, wonderful conversations with them. And then when it came time for the concert, I was blown away. Oh my gosh, they were incredible. I had high expectations for them anyway, but they completely blew me out of the water. They were
amazing.
unreal. And I was just floored. It's the first time, like, I've worked as the front of house manager at this venue for almost a year. And I've been to a lot of shows. I've seen a lot of acts come through that theater. That is the first time that I have gone out of my way to go and sit in the sound booth for like half the show so that I could just absorb and watch. Like, I was engrossed in this performance. They were amazing. And like, I feel so fortunate to have experienced that, especially on their farewell tour, because like Father Martin was telling me how all three of them have really considered their career together to be a ministry, and
Mm,
how
beautiful.
many people have come up to them and admitted very readily that they are not church going people and they would never sit through a homily, but that they were very moved and very touched by the musical experience that the priests were able to bring to them. And they kind of encountered something of God in that. And
Oh,
I
that's
just thought
really
it was so
beautiful.
beautiful. Like, I have so much respect for these priests. Please do pray for them. But so that being
Yeah.
said, since Friday, I have been like binging their music. And they have some really, really great pieces. Like, honorable mention, I'm going to say for the week, it's this beautiful Irish song called Ag Christ an Shiel.
Mhm.
And I, off the top of my head, I don't know the translation. It's quite a popular song here, and it's something to the effect of like, Christ is the sower and we are the seeds. Christ is the fisherman and we are the fish, and may we all be like caught up in His grace, basically the net of His grace.
Oh, wow, that's beautiful. Yeah.
It's a really beautiful song, but the song that I think most moved me of the whole concert was their rendition of Morning Has Broken.
Ooh.
The harmonies were so tight, and like, again, there were many, many songs. And they weren't all like religious in nature either. They sang some Beatles hits. They sang stuff. They sang a piece from The Prince of Egypt, which is, I guess, kind of semi religious. But I've heard Morning Has Broken sung thousands of times. It's a very like, we all know it. It's a very common hymn. But
Yeah.
something about the way these men sing it, having given their lives over to service of God. And I'm not even sure who's done their arrangement, if they've done it themselves or if a composer has written it for them. But wow, I was blown away and really moved. And like, just go listen to it. It's amazing. It's great.
Oh,
Yeah,
man.
it's really beautiful. So definitely keep them in your prayers, and
Oh, yeah.
go stream their music because they deserve it for sure.
I wish my grandpa were still around so I could share that with him because he loved to listen to the priests. He had a couple of their CDs. Like he had a few things that were on repeat. It was always Josh Groban and the priests. And then there was one other thing too, and I can't remember it, but he would always like listen to these CDs,
Yeah,
while he
yeah.
was like getting ready in the morning and stuff. So I wish he was still around that I could share that with him because he would have loved to have heard that you got to like uh, do like stage managing for them. So
Yeah, maybe he was there, like, in spirit, looking down from
I'm sure
heaven.
he was. I'm sure he was. Yeah. Um, my what I've been listening for the week is significantly less. significantly less cool than that. Um, I we just got a new TV and I have the ability to link Spotify to it, which has been very nice instead of like
Nice.
streaming that from the TV because of the speakers and all of that are much better than my computer or my phone, you know. And I put on the other day while I was working a it was a just it was kind of it wasn't a playlist specifically. It was more of like, you know, I put on one piece and it just like went through all kinds of ones like it sort of deal. And it was all Sibelius symphonies. And it brought me back to probably my all-time favorite Sibelius symphony, a specific movement of a Sibelius symphony, and that is the first movement of his third symphony. It is an absolute ethereal masterpiece. There's just some really incredible epic moments in it. Unexpected twists and turns that you kind of are not expecting in the music. You know, like it's got it all.
Yeah,
It's a very nostalgic piece for me, and it was just nice to revisit it. You know,
for sure. That's really cool.
yeah, highly recommended. Sibelius is an underrated composer, I think.
Yeah, I would agree with that actually. I can't say off the like top of my head that I know the symphony that you're talking about, but I definitely will have to go give it a listen.
Yeah, everyone knows him for Finlandia, and that's like it. But he has like all these symphonies and other works as well that are just so worth checking out. I mean,
Yeah,
Finlandia is good, don't get me wrong, but like if I had the choice of playing in an orchestra with this symphony versus Finlandia, I would choose this symphony any day over Finlandia.
so fair. Also, can we talk about this new Mozart piece?
Oh my gosh. Yes, I keep seeing the most hilarious memes on Instagram about how, you know, how Mozart dropped new music before Taylor Swift dropped her Reputation Taylor's version or something like
Yeah,
that. And I just like I keep cracking up over it, but it's really good.
it is, but like to no one's surprise, obviously. Like, tell me
Obviously, it's Mozart.
everything
It's
Mozart wrote
Mozart.
was not golden, but like, yes, I keep also seeing like Instagram memes about it, and I must agree, it was not on my 2024 bingo card that Mozart was going
No,
to be dropping new
absolutely not.
music. But it
Absolutely
kind
not.
of makes me excited for the, I mean, thousands, if not millions, of like unidentified pieces of music that we have because, like, think of the hidden gems that could potentially be
Oh
discovered,
my gosh,
like, even
yeah.
in the next decade and what could come out of
Yeah.
that. It makes me really excited for like the future of previously unknown or unidentified classical music or music in general.
Absolutely. Also, can we
Very
talk for a
cool.
moment about the fact that it was found in a library? Like how long was it
Yeah,
in this library? You know?
but then at the same time, that also makes total sense to me.
It
You
does,
know,
100%. And I say that as someone who worked in a library for 3 semesters of college, but it's just so funny.
yeah. But then, okay, so this is getting tangential now, but it's kind of an interesting story. You know the piece that we didn't see at the Art Museum, Cecilia, here in Dublin, The Betrayal of
Yes. Oh my
Jesus
gosh,
by
yes.
Caravaggio?
Yes. I was very
Like,
disappointed about that.
I know. So when Cecilia was visiting me, it just happened to be like the one week where the painting was sent on exchange up to Belfast for some event that they were having up there. So what can you
So
do?
mad.
Very
So mad.
unfortunate. But that Caravaggio piece had been missing for like hundreds of years.
Oh
And
my
then,
gosh, yes. That's right. You told me that story.
yeah, and it was just discovered in this Jesuit community's dining room in Ireland. And that's
The
another one
irony of irony.
that I'm like, how did nobody, these like very well educated, very intelligent Jesuit men, look at one of the greatest, pieces of sacred art and not think, you know what? It's kind of curious that this has been missing for a couple hundred years and it's just been chilling in our dining room. Maybe we should get somebody to come and check this out and make sure that it's not actually the original. And like, lo and behold, there it was, just in their dining room. So I feel like things like that happen a lot.
Yeah, I think they definitely happen more than we expect them to, which is, yeah, it's kind of funny. It's kind of funny, but then it's cool when they do pop up.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, it's really interesting. But anyway, yeah, go stream Mozart's new piece.
Well, thank you all for joining us today as we chatted about moral theology and all kinds of stuff. And we will be praying for you. And until next time, God bless.
God bless. Thanks for tuning in to this episode of the Little Sparks podcast. For more information on this podcast and our ministry, please visit www.thehildegardcollective.com.